Hello. So we're back online. I had done another one of these cello basic care streaming videos before, but I didn't have such a good Wi-Fi connection. So today that should be much better. And I wanted to, since the video did actually get cut off last time, I wanted to go through a few of the last bits of information that I had wanted to cover last time that I didn't manage to get a chance to get to. Um, So the first thing I wanted to start with was essentially your practice setup area and how to deal with that in general. I suppose the first thing you want to start with is a space, and you're going to want a space that's probably about as big as you can stretch your arms around you with. So if you can do this comfortably up and down and you don't hit any objects, you probably will have enough room to practice your cello. So that's usually, I don't know, about 2 meters squared, um, something like that. The most important bit of equipment is probably your chair. You want a comfortable chair that will be flat and not too cushy, but also not too hard so that it doesn't hurt you. Um, the cushiness makes it so that you end up not sitting quite straight. You'll end up balancing around a whole bunch, and so you want to have it just a little cushioning so that you can sit on it for a while. Um, it should be at a height that's comfortable for you and your knee, especially. You want your legs to form a 90-degree angle with the floor. So if they're resting comfortably on the floor, you should have a 90-degree angle at your knee. Ideally, this helps your leg actually balance perfectly. If it's at a 90-degree angle and your foot is flat on the floor, this is the reason why most cello teachers will always tell you to put your feet flat on the floor. The main reason is because you want to create that 90-degree angle, which is actually dependent a bit on your chair height. If you have a chair that you can adjust the height, that might be really nice. Otherwise, there are a lot of chairs that will probably find you can just test them out and see which chairs fit the best for you. Um, so yeah, so that's the most important thing with chairs, and you also don't want them to have armrests because, like I said, you don't want to hit anything that's within your arm reach. Um, Armrests are no good. And spinning chairs are also not so great because they will often kind of make it more comfortable for you, I suppose, to like twist your back in ways that are not so great for your back health in the end. They'll kind of force you to sit in uncomfortable positions or maintain them. Some people think that they're actually more comfortable because they can like move around, but I would disagree. So you can definitely test it out if you want to, but I would have your main practice chair be something stable and solid. If you want, it should be a chair that you can easily slide around in. So if you actually want to move, you can do so, but then that'll keep your spine straight and not twist around things. So that's with chairs. I am taking questions now. I see there are a couple of people here. So if you have any questions about basic cello care, then you can shout them in, and I will change my list of things here to accommodate whatever your question would be. So I will be checking the chat for that. Right. So some suggestions of chairs you can look for your practice setting. There are definitely some inexpensive IKEA options. Basically, the best chair is the one you already have, in a sense. So look around your apartment, your house, find a chair that you think is the most comfortable to sit on, that's flat, that has no armrests, and that doesn't spin. Um, there should be most dining chairs are fitting that exact description. So a lot of chairs you might have in your kitchen might already be the right ones. But if you want to get a special practice chair, I can highly recommend piano benches. Piano benches are nice because they're adjustable. You can get an inexpensive one. They're also flat and they don't have a chair back. Backs of chairs are a bit of a point of dispute with cellists. Most people will say that you don't want a back for your chair because you're not going to be leaning on it. So you don't actually need a back of your chair. This is also because most chairs are kind of too wide. If you sit all the way at the back of the chair, often your knee will come up to the edge of the chair, and that will make it so you can't move very well, and also your cello might even hit the chair. The back of the cello might hit the chair, which is definitely a no-no, because it will vibrate against the chair and make noises that that you don't want. So if you want to have a chair that has a back, though, because maybe you have some history of back problems, you have some back pain, you or have been told that getting some back support is important for you specifically, which will usually not be necessary for most young and healthy people. Um, if that's the case, though, if you really want to have support for your back, if you know that that's important for you, there are special cello chairs that have an adjustable back, and these are often used by orchestras. A lot of major orchestras in the world who have kind of their own dedicated concert hall will have their own cello chairs, and the cello chairs are pretty cool because you can adjust the height, you can adjust the angle. Some cellists like to be tipped forward a little bit, which is the opposite of what most dining chairs do. And other chairs that we usually sit in, they always tip us back into the back. But to play the cello, that's really strenuous because you end up pushing against it. So you can change the angle of the cello chairs slightly, and you can move the back forward or backwards, which will mean that you can find a comfortable place to sit where your back is supported. The other thing that the cello chairs do that's different from a normal chair backs are usually quite high, will support all of your back up to your shoulders, ideally. But a cello chair will usually give you support only for your lower back. So the seat back cushion will be kind of just the size of your lower back, allow you to lean on it in the place where you actually need that support, which is your lower back, really, but leaving your shoulders completely free. So this is the biggest reason why you really don't want a tall back, because your shoulders will end up sort of hitting the chair and that will constrict your motion. It's really important to make sure that your chair is not making you make problems in your technique, that you're not actually getting more tension or more issues because of the way you're sitting. That's why the chair, I think, is probably one of the most important things you're going to want to invest in. Most of the other things you can do very much on the cheap. But like I said, you don't have to buy a chair. Just look around, find a chair that gives you a 90-degree angle when you sit in it if you put your feet down flat, that has back support that's close enough to your back if you need it, and that's flat, and maybe a little cushion so that you can sit on it for an hour or however long you tend to practice. Um, so the thing that kind of comes along with the chair is your floor. We all have an end pin on our cello, and the end pin. Uh, I talked about this last time. But the end pin has always a sharp tip, and that means that the sharp tip. And by the way, if you haven't found a sharp tip on your end pin, I'll just repeat this again. There is very often a small rubber protection on the tip of an end pin. I'll show you by taking off my end pin here. And then you can put the protection onto the cello end pin so that it doesn't destroy anything like your case or your cello bag. This is the biggest reason why almost everyone gets a cello that already has a small little rubber tip. You can buy extras of these if you lose them. I have lost many in my cello career, so I always have a few spare ones. But otherwise, the cello end pin will be sharp. Um, and it is meant to be sharp enough to make holes in wood. If you have a wood floor, you probably actually don't want to be making holes in it on a regular basis. The holes will get very large and very deep very quickly. So for the most part, you're going to be wanting to protect your floor. Um, there are several ways to do this. One of the easiest ways is to just put down a carpet. In that case, you also want to make sure that your carpet is a carpet that you don't mind putting holes in, because again, it will definitely get some holes in the carpet. Carpets are usually kind of nice though, because sometimes you can leave the rubber tip on the end pin and it won't slip. Carpets will often provide just enough grip support that that rubber tip will then suddenly become enough of an end pin holder so that you can feel free and put your end pin down wherever you like it and readjust it anytime you like. That's one of the main arguments for some people who don't want to have a cello strap. That's why they don't like it, is because they can't readjust at any given point in time. So you can look to have a carpet. If you have a carpet and you're realizing that you're making holes through your carpet, I can really suggest putting a small plate of very thin plywood or some sort of compressed wood or plastic, even a chair protector kind of. They sell those for office chairs. You can put one of those under your carpet. Make sure that it's that your carpet is sticking enough that you don't slip right off. But otherwise, you can put one of those under your carpet, and that will protect your floor from your carpet because your end pin won't go down through the carpet all that much, just enough to keep things stable. So the next thing is if your end pin for whatever reason is not sharp, you can get it sharpened, and I would definitely recommend sharpening it unless you know that you're never going to go anywhere with your instrument, because there are some concert locations where you can put your end pin down on the floor and make a hole in it, and that's totally okay. Sometimes that'll be if you're going to play outside or on a deck or something, or just a one-time thing. A lot of concert halls, if you notice, at least in Europe, that's definitely the case. I've noticed. A lot of cellists are allowed to make holes in the concert hall floor, and this is just replaced on a regular basis. Um, so that can also be the case. I would always ask. I tend not. I want to be polite about my hole making in wood floors, and so I tend to always ask if it's okay for me to make a hole in the floor. And some people will be like, "Yeah, yeah, it's fine. It's an old thing. We don't care." And other people will be like, "Oh, please don't make a hole in the floor." So always bring some sort of cello strap, something to keep your end pin safe from, or at least to keep the floor safe from your end pin. Uh, there we go. But I didn't bring an end pin. One second. I'm gonna grab my cello strap. All right. So this is a cello strap. This is the kind of cello strap that I find most practical. I find it practical because it has a strap, and that means that it will stick or it will hold on pretty much any floor in any situation. There are a lot of end pin holders that are basically just this square part. Sometimes they're round, but they're just the tip here with no strap. And they all talk about how sticky they are and how well they stay on the floor, and I believe it as long as your floors are very clean. Um, Almost no one's floors are always that clean. So you'd have to actually really keep your floor clean all the time and keep your end pin holder clean all the time in order to have it stick properly. And eventually the material will still become slightly too dirty to be used effectively, which is why I've had one of these for 20 years and I'm still perfectly happy with it, and um, would definitely recommend it because it will stick on anything. So a lot of times, some people might say, okay, like maybe I have a piano bench that doesn't have four legs, or you have some sort of a chair that doesn't have four legs, then you can't put this strap underneath of it. But most times, you can actually put the chair somehow onto the strap and then adjust the length to match what you need, and you can use it that way. So I still recommend cello straps. They come in all different shapes. Some of them have a wood and some of them have rope. Some of them have whatever. There, I would say it's a matter of personal preference. Look for the ones that you think are pretty, or that for you seem to fit your bill. You can also use a lot of strange other objects. You can use old leather belts, or the leather belt you might have on in a pinch. I've met several cellists who had to use their belts or their cello straps, the straps that they have on their cases, as an end pin holder when they had forgotten theirs and didn't have it there. So that can also happen. You might end up somewhere where you need end pin holding and end pin protection, and you don't have any with you. In which case, you will definitely want to look for alternatives, and that those are the two that work the best: leather belts, because you can actually loop them into themselves and have them stay under the chair leg, or the cello strap, the whatever straps you have on your soft case or your hard case. If you can take them off, you can then attach them or kind of sit the chair on top of them. and that will work. It's not the best solution because then your chair might wiggle a bit, but it'll work when you need it. Um, Good. Then sharpening your end pin is something that usually your instrument maker will do. And I always thought that there would be an instrument maker wherever you live. And then I started teaching online classes, and I realized that some people live in places where there really are, firstly, no cello teachers, and secondly, no instrument makers. And that meant that they have to come up with creative solutions on how to deal with instrument problems. How do you deal with any sorts of things? But one of the easy ones to fix is the end pin, because the end pin you can actually get it sharpened at a key maker's shop. Most key makers will have the machine that you need, which is basically just a sanding machine that spins. And if you explain to them what you need and you tell them that you need this end pin to have a nice sharp tip, they should be able to do it for you. They'll probably be a little bit at a loss as to what to charge you for this work, but I think it's relatively easy for them to do, and with a little bit of explanation, you should be able to get them to sharpen your end pin for you. The easiest, of course, though, is to go to an instrument maker's shop, as they will know exactly what you need and exactly how to do it, and they might even have some suggestions for different materials of your end pin, and that sort of thing that you could consider doing with your cello. It's really helpful to have an instrument maker sort of at your side, someone that you can rely on and trust to take good care of your instrument. And building that relationship will often mean that you'll be able to maybe even go into the shop for very minor repairs or just small questions, and they'll charge you very little or nothing at all. I've had that also happen where the time is not even counted because they know that I'll be back if anything major happens to my instrument. So I would definitely suggest looking around. Where are the instrument makers in your area? Set up an appointment, get to know them, take your cello in to them, and let them have a look at it and see if everything's okay. Cellos do need to have regular maintenance because they're wooden instruments. They expand and shrink with the humidity in the air, which means that when it gets more humid, they expand, and when it gets drier, they shrink. And generally speaking, that'll go just fine. But it means that all of the parts of your cello move a little bit, and sometimes they will move so much out of where they were supposed to be that they need to be pushed or pulled back into place. So I would definitely suggest going to an instrument maker, building that relationship, and taking your instrument about once a year or so to your instrument maker. You can definitely go more often. That definitely won't hurt. But once a year would be a good rule of thumb. That will usually, if you take good care of your cello. Otherwise, you probably won't even need to do anything in that once a year. But maybe every second year you might need something more extensive. One of the things that a lot of people don't realize is that your instrument will need sometimes a sanding of the fingerboard. That's something that a lot of people don't realize could be necessary, because the fingerboard is getting your fingers, and in a perfect world, it's really just your skin that's touching the fingerboard, but it's also the steel string and possibly your fingernails on occasion if they're a bit long. And that means that there will eventually be some little bumps and dents inside of the fingerboard, even on an ebony fingerboard. Ebony is still weaker than steel strings. If you play on gut strings, maybe this doesn't happen quite as quickly. But I have noticed that every few years, it is important and necessary to get the fingerboard sanded. And basically, they'll just sand it down so that it will straighten itself back out, and then you'll have a nice even playing surface again. And it's pretty helpful because every so often it'll get so bad that you'll actually get buzzing of the strings because of bumps in your fingerboard. Uh, Eventually, your fingerboard could get so thin that you have to replace the whole thing, but that usually it will probably happen once every few decades or so. It's not a very fast process. But it does depend a bit on the player, how often you play, how much you play. If you push very hard or not so much, or there are just a lot of factors that go into how often you might need to take your cello in to get the fingerboard sanded. And if you sand it a lot, then it will have to be replaced a bit sooner. The other thing that the violin makers will do for you, that you definitely want them to do for you and not do on your own, is any adjustments to your sound post or your bridge. So your bridge here will usually not move unless you hit it. But again, because of the motion of the cello, as it shrinks and expands from the humidity, it can get crooked, and it can also move slightly from its position. Generally speaking, as I said, only if you hit it, but sometimes those hits are just little bumps that you did accidentally, or if you have a cello bag. I had some students who were bumped on the street or in a bus or in the subway, and so then the bridge went out of its position. That you generally do want to have a violin maker have a look at that if that happens. If your bridge does move out of position, it is possible for you to move it back, but you should do this with great care. You can loosen the strings slightly, about a half step or a whole step at the most, and then you can gently kind of tap the bridge back into position. But I would do this with really maybe another person to help make sure that it doesn't accidentally tip over and smack down on your cello table, which could be damaging to the cello varnish. And you want to also make sure that that it stays straight and that everything is well positioned. So anytime your bridge has gone out of position, especially if you had to move it back, definitely go see your instrument maker. Have them have another look, see if you've really put it back in the right place for your instrument. The bridge is basically, the positioning is basically also determined by the sound post, and the sound post is determined by the bridge. They work together completely. The sound post is a stick inside of your cello. If you pick up your cello up to your eye level and look inside one of the F holes, I can usually see it from here. My sound post is over here underneath the bridge, more or less. It's in this area. The sound post is positioned really carefully, and it will help maximize the sound quality that you're getting from your instrument. It can, the positioning of your sound post can kind of clarify your sound or darken it or dampen it or all sorts of things. It's incredibly important. Its function is more or less to both to provide a little bit of pressure against the bridge, because the bridge is pressing the table downwards, and the sound post sort of keeps it from collapsing very easily. But its most important function is actually, I think, to connect the top and the bottom. So it connects the top and the back of your instrument and helps both of these swing in the same at the same rate, or at a more similar rate than they would if they weren't connected. In any case, that moving the sound post is really something I would not do unless it's an absolute emergency and you live somewhere where there are no instrument makers anywhere close to you, in which case you probably have to learn how to do this properly. I don't know how to do this at all. There's a special S-shaped tool that you can go use. Sound posts all have a hole in them, and then the instrument maker will move the sound post around inside of your cello very carefully to make sure that it's in the right positioning. So definitely ask your instrument maker about that, or there might be some blogs or forums, I don't know, that explain this process a bit more, but I would really don't do it on your own if you can help it. Because these sorts of, the things that can go wrong with moving your sound post do involve damage to your cello body, which is often a reason for devaluing your instrument or making it essentially irreparable, or costing you even much more in repairs. Any cracks on your cello table are very, especially the table, but anywhere on your instrument really, are really a problem for the value of the instrument and also for the longevity of the instrument. And they're difficult to repair, especially if you have to take the table off. So always try to avoid doing anything that would damage, especially the top of your cello, but also the back. And the sides are usually pretty tough, but that you also don't want to break those. Um, One of the things you will probably encounter at some point in your cello owning life, though, is what we call an open seam. The cello is put together in a couple of different parts, and it's connected here and there to the sides and to the back and the front by glue. And this glue is a flexible glue. It stretches and shrinks with the humidity and the temperature, which is the other reason why you again want to keep your instrument in a fairly comfortable temperature zone. It shouldn't change too drastically. That's kind of the most important thing. So if you happen to live in a place where your house is always cold, your cello will probably be fine as long as it stays always cold. But if you're going from always cold to very hot to very cold to very hot, that's not going to go so well with the instrument because the big changes of temperature, those are really hard for your instrument. So you always want to minimize those changes. I talked about this last week a little bit. You can keep your cello in its bag or in its case if you're opening the windows to let a little air in, or you can make sure that you have there are some silk bags or cloth bags that you can put over your instrument if you have it on a stand, or if your cello bag is very thin or cello case is really thin. I have a very thin carbon case and it's not particularly helpful for temperature changes. Then you can actually get a bag that goes over your entire cello, like a little sleeping bag for your cello. And that'll keep it warm for you. There are some instrument makers that make their own. This is the sort of thing that if you're handy with a sewing machine, you could probably make yourself as well. There are definitely some tutorials. It's not that complicated. You're just making a big bag for your cello. Anyway, so I was saying that you can get open seams if you have large temperature changes, or just over time, if it's been many years since you've had your cello. Every so often, all of the sum of all the temperature changes you ever experience with your instrument will lead to an open seam. And that just means that one of your parts of your cello came separated from each other. It will usually be almost invisible and just somewhere along the edge of the table, connecting to the back, or sorry, to the sides, or from the back connecting to the sides, you'll get a tiny little hairline crack as the two parts separate from each other. So it's not the same as an actual crack where your cello wood, like the table or the side, has cracked in itself. It's actually broken. It's really just the open seam is really just the place where they connect came apart a little bit. The glue stopped sticking so well. And that you will go to an instrument maker for. You need to plan a couple of days for that because the glue takes a couple of days to dry. So even if your instrument maker has nothing to do, they will spend a few minutes, or I don't know how long it takes, but a few minutes gluing it back together and clamping it down, and then your cello will probably have to stay in the workshop for a day or two to make sure that it dries properly before you take it home. Um, so that's one of the things that will often happen. You'll notice if you have an open seam, because I said it's really hard to see. So most of the time you won't see it right away. But you'll notice because your cello will start making a buzzing sound. Anytime your instrument is making a buzzing sound, try to figure out where it's coming from. There are lots of different reasons for buzzing sounds. It's possible that when you put your strings into the string box, that one of them is kind of at an angle or hitting something else that's vibrating, and so that when you play, the string in the string box vibrates, in which case you could just take your string out, rewind it in, and see if you can straighten it out so it doesn't touch something that was moving and creating that buzz. The other thing that can happen is that your fine tuners are loose for some reason. So you can check those and see if one of them is faulty or if it's starting to fall out because you've loosened your fine tuner so much. That sort of thing can definitely happen as well. Or because one of your strings is not really connected very well here. But anytime there's a buzz, go and look for it. And then the sort of worst case scenario is then you hear the buzz. It's not your strings. It's not your fine tuner. It's not your end pin. By the way, your end pin can also be a source of vibration. Sometimes I've had that a few times with end pins that are inside the cello. If you play the cello with the end pin inside, you will get a rattling sound, and that's the end pin inside vibrating. And if you take it out, sound is gone. So sometimes that could be the problem. The other thing could be the end pin holder here, this connecting part. that may have become loose. So definitely check all of those things before worrying about an open seam, because if you've been taking good care of making sure that your temperature changes aren't too crazy, it's probably not an open seam the first time you hear a buzzing sound. It's probably one of these other things. But if you checked all of those things and it's definitely not that, then the way that you check for an open seam is by tapping with your knuckle around the edge of your cello until you find the place where it sounds a bit different. You'll hear that instead of having a nice hollow kind of sound, it'll get a little bit brighter sounding or a little bit less deep. You won't hear the whole full body of the cello vibrate, or you'll even hear a little click as the wood hits itself. So definitely you tap around and listen very, very carefully. It's the kind of the way to do it. And if you go to your instrument maker, they will do pretty much exactly the same thing. And then once you found the place that looks strange, then I would get a flashlight or a bright light and then look at that area, see if you can see the crack. Um, but if you hear it already, then probably there is definitely a crack. So then go to your instrument maker. Again, if you've built up a good relationship with them, they'll be perfectly happy to take care of a problem like that. They're very normal issues that can happen to anyone based on the quality of the glue or just how much time it's been since the last time anyone glued anything on your instrument. And of course, just the lifestyle that you lead with your instrument. Some cellos, because of the wood that they're built out of, are really just much more susceptible to these things than other cellos. Could even be different from one tree to the next, so it doesn't necessarily mean that one kind of wood is a problem or the other one is perfect or something. Each instrument is definitely its own little thing. All right, so that's sort of one of the things you can watch out for is the open seams. You definitely want to avoid those. And apart from that, usually nothing major will happen to your instrument unless it's had some sort of an accident. Um, right, then we were kind of started. I started with the topic of what you want to have in your practice space. We talked about how you want to have a chair and how you can think about what sort of a floor situation you have if you use a cello strap or one of those UFO looking round cello holders without a strap, or if you use a carpet. The other thing that you can, or that you definitely want to have in your practice space, especially if you're learning with sheet music, which most people will do at some point in their lives, because it does really make practicing at home on your own much easier. Then at that point you're going to want a music stand. It doesn't actually really matter what kind of a music stand you get, in my opinion, because for the most part they're all doing the job of holding your music. So there's a couple of things that they should be able to do. They should be sturdy enough to hold your music, so keep that in mind, especially if you're going to be using a tablet for your sheet music. Tablets are heavy, so you're probably going to have a little trouble if you get a very lightweight stand, um, or a very, very cheap one that maybe is not perfectly well balanced. Paper music is actually much lighter than tablets, unless you have a very big book. But the usual sheet music is I don't know, anywhere between 1 and 5 pages for even a sonata or a concerto, and so that's actually quite light. But tablets are becoming more and more of a standard thing, and so in order to hold your tablet, you're definitely going to want to have a nice sturdy stand. You can a lot of instrument or not well actually instrument shops might have some stands too. But music shops, if you have any music shops in your area, you might even be able to go out and try a few. Otherwise, you can just order them online. So then here comes the fun part is always building your music stand. And my method is always to bring the two long arms up, leave the two short ones down. You know what I'm talking about if you own a music stand. And then open it up. And that should be an easy way to have your music stand ready to go. And then to close it, I bend and essentially reverse the process. So I've just bent the inner ones in and then bring the long legs, the long arms back down. That's the easiest way for me. There are a couple of other ways, but most of the other things that you might do will kind of bend your music stand backwards and it'll start to get warped, which is a little bit annoying, especially with paper sheets, because then they don't stay quite straight on your music stand, or they might fall off regularly. The other thing your music stand should definitely be able to do is it should be adjustable. It doesn't have to be adjustable in like 5 different places if that's not what you need, but it definitely needs to be adjustable in terms of height. If you're, I mean, I suppose that most everyone who's watching is a cellist. Sitting height is not particularly high, so we don't need to worry so much about how tall the music stand can actually be. However, um, if you're a violinist or if you're a cellist who likes to play standing up for any reason, there are some great ways of playing standing up now. Then you should probably make sure that you get one that's tall enough for you. I don't. I'm a fairly short person. I don't really need to worry about the maximum height of music stands, but a lot of them are not necessarily that tall because a lot of them are built with sitting musicians in mind. A lot of practicing and a lot of orchestra playing and chamber music playing happens seated, especially even with the violinists and the violists, everyone's sitting. And so a lot of music stands are not built to be very high. So if you know that you're going to be standing, and especially if you know that you're a relatively tall person, definitely check out the specs of your music stand. See if it's tall enough to hold the music for you at eye level, which is the best place to have it for practicing. I say for practicing specifically because a lot of times if you're playing in chamber music groups or in orchestra, you want to have the music stand a bit lower than your eye level, specifically so that you can see the other musicians, so that you have the other musicians at eye level and the music kind of a little bit below. Um, Otherwise, it's kind of right in front of your face and you can't see anyone, which is not so good for connecting with your other fellow musicians. So that's why music stands are usually adjustable in some way, and you definitely want to have them adjustable so that in practice situations or in performance situations, you can actually have it at the height you want. Those solid music stands are really cool if you're going to be practicing at home. I find them really nice to be able to then hold my tablet or a couple of large books, and maybe I can have all of my sheet music that I'm practicing on the one stand instead of having everything sorted in different places. Um, they're also solid enough to hold your cell phone if you're using it as a tuner or a metronome, which I highly recommend because I find that most tuners and metronomes are sufficient for your basic needs. In those app forms, you just get a free version of the app, and most of them do your job well enough. Um, and the other thing that they can hold is if you did decide to buy a dedicated tuner or a dedicated metronome, actual metronome device, then you can fit those onto the stand as well, even with your sheet music on it. They have this nice wide uh, lip there where you can put that stuff along with your sheet music, and they're very stable. They will not tip over very easily, um, but they're heavy. So if you're going to be moving around a lot, the folding ones are definitely the most practical. But if you're going to be staying at home, or if you know you can afford, or feel like having a couple of different stands, somehow you can never have too many music stands, in my experience. Then maybe you'll have one solid one that you keep at home, and a folding one that you take with you to other places when you need to go somewhere else, which is the system that I have. I learned after at least for my young professional career, especially, but even since then, that it was really useful. Inevitably, someone always forgets their music stand. You go to a gig and you're playing as a string quartet or as a trio or even a larger group as an orchestra, and somebody managed to forget to bring their music stand. They didn't put it in their car, they didn't pack it into their bag. And so it's really useful to have an extra one somewhere. And so a lot of times, if I'm playing with a group of people, if I can carry it, if I'm going by car or if I have a suitcase or I can carry it easily, then I will bring 2 music stands, even though I only need one. And it has saved me or saved my colleagues several times, actually. And I've been saved by it a few times too when colleagues of mine had an extra stand in their car and mine broke maybe, or I didn't have it with me for whatever reason. So keep that in mind. Music stands, in a sense, you can never have too many, especially if you're working as a professional or even as an amateur, playing different gigs outside of the house. That's definitely really useful. But if you're home all the time, and you rarely go anywhere and you own a car, then you can get any music stand you want, and you will be able to carry it whenever you need to. One last little thing about music stands. I do own a metal music stand. There are now super lightweight, non-metal music stands that are made with all sorts of different materials. They're great, but they're not so great for outdoor concerts. I just wanted to mention that if you're playing outdoors, there's this thing called wind, and wind is going to make your music go flying. Um, Whatever sheet music it happens to be. Tablets, by the way, are very good for this because they don't go flying. However, especially if you have a tablet, but just generally, you're going to want to get a music stand that is stable enough to hold your music and your tablet, even when the wind blows. One of the things that I sometimes have forgotten is that even if you get a whole bunch of clips, or my favorite is magnets, you have a metal stand so that I can use magnets to keep my music in place. Really strong, small magnets that you can literally place on your sheet music. It's the best. Um, but if it's really well done, then your music stand becomes a sail. And so when the wind hits it, the whole music stand will start flying away or tipping over. So do keep that in mind if you have a tablet. They're heavy, but they will kind of, if they're blown hard enough by the wind, they might bring the music stand with them or fall off your music stand, which, considering how expensive tablets can be, is something you really want to watch out for. So just be careful with outdoor gigs and music stands. If you're really going to be playing outside in windy places often, then one of these stable, solid music stands might even be your best option, so that it's unlikely to tip over, even if the wind hits it. And so while we're on that topic, that was one of the last things I wanted to talk about today is sheet music, as in paper sheet music versus tablets. Um, I have been using paper sheet music for a very long time, and I bought a tablet about 2 years ago. Paper is really nice because you can very easily write in it. You can erase things from it. You can draw on it easily. It feels kind of nice to use. Um, but it means that you have to turn pages. It's obviously it's not digital, so even the erasing, maybe it's nice, but maybe it's not so nice because in a digital format you might be able to just click a button and have everything disappear that you wrote into your sheet music. Um, and paper is also, it will multiply. I've ended up with several shelves of sheet music that are in various states of organization. You do want to try to keep them organized. Otherwise, you might make the unfortunate mistake of buying something you've already bought before, just because you couldn't find it. Uh, and so if you wanted to have a lot of sheet music that you wanted to bring to a gig, then sometimes it can be really bulky too. Then you have this big stack of music, that you need for a performance or for hanging out with some friends and playing some music together, and it just gets really bulky after a while. So one of the things you can do with the tablet is then obviously you can put all of your music inside of it. And even though the tablet is heavier than a lot of parts, single parts, it is definitely lighter than a stack of music. So um, that is definitely nice. They're also easy to search. So even though you could really have hundreds of pieces of music in the one tablet and be able to search for whatever you need and get it instantly. That keeps your music organized in a way that paper is harder to do unless you're really good about making sure that everything is sorted by category and by composer name, or something. You have to come up with a system of organization for your paper sheet music. But the problem is that the tablets are, of course, battery powered. So every so often, if you really need to use the tablet on a battery situation and it happens to run out of battery, then suddenly you have no music. So paper can sometimes. I do like having a mix of both. So I have paper sheet music, and I digitalize it. I create PDFs out of it, and I use mostly my tablet then. But if the tablet is somewhere else, or if the batteries run out, or if someone else is using it, then I can always take out my paper notes and use those. Tablets, however, I would say are also only useful, only really nice with a foot pedal, a page turning pedal. I really like this one. This is a page flip Firefly. It's small, it's compact, it's battery powered, and these batteries seem to last for a million years. Um, but this makes it really cool. Then suddenly your tablet is great for everything because you can have a piece of music that is 5 pages long, and that would never fit on a music stand. You can usually fit only about 3 pages on a music stand, and you can just use your foot to pedal through them. So that's really cool for music, especially that doesn't have any rests, no places to page turn, and also just for very long things. The other thing that I suddenly started to love to do is to use the score, and to play from the score of a piece of music, which was never possible before. But this way, you could get a score of an entire symphony and then be playing your cello part, and looking at the other parts at the same time. And since you have the foot pedal to turn every couple of measures, then that'll actually work out really nicely and it'll be really fun. Uh, Without a foot pedal, you can usually only see 1 page on a tablet, and that tends to not be enough for most pieces. There are, of course, if you're a beginner and most of your pieces are very short, maybe that would be enough for a while. But um, the page turner device is not particularly expensive, and it's a really nice advantage. It's really nice advantage for turning pages without your hands constantly. So in my opinion, a mix of both paper sheet music and tablet sheet music would be kind of your best bet. If you have to choose, tablets are definitely more expensive, especially if you want a nice big screen. And paper is large and easy to read right from the start. So in terms of short-term investments, the paper music is always a cheaper option. You can also get it used, or you might be able to find some sheet music or borrow some from someone. Check out your local library; they may have some sheet music there as well. And you can then use those. Check out a lot of sheet music, and then buy only the parts you actually want to keep on long term. That sort of thing. And then the tablets are just good for when you have a large collection of sheet music that you need to access on a regular basis. So yeah, I've been talking for a while, so a few of you might have joined the stream in the middle. If you have any questions that you want to ask for any reason, anything about cello care, I've been talking now about kind of your practice setup and sheet music and all this stuff. We've kind of drifted a bit away from the actual cello because I talked about a lot of cello topics last week. But you can ask any questions you may have about any aspect of cello care at this time, and or at any time. I'm gonna go back and talk about mutes because I think cello mutes didn't really get covered last time. I'm pretty sure the video cut those out, or most of it. Um, a lot of people are worried about neighbors and kind of bothering making too much sound or noise with their instrument. If you live in an apartment complex, then this is definitely an issue. If you have your own house, maybe you don't really care. But even if you do have your own house, maybe you can only practice late at night when your kids want to go to sleep, or when your other family members want to be uh, enjoying some quiet time, or sleeping. And so that means that a lot of times people will look for options of how to play quietly or silently even. Um, One of the things that you can do for that is get a practice mute. Practice mutes come in kind of two basic materials. There's usually a metal one or a rubber one. They both have sort of their advantages and disadvantages. The metal ones tend to be more effective at actually killing your sound. They will be they're heavier, and so what they do is they really dampen the sound. Um, One of the things that most people don't know is what to do with this strange contraption. But basically, each of these little legs will go in between one of your strings, or not each of them, but the two on the edge, they'll go outside of the strings, and the two in the middle will go inside of the strings. So that you end up putting it on like this. And this one is not fitting my cello, so I'm going to use the rubber one to demonstrate. Same kind of principle. The legs go in between the strings, and don't touch them, because if you touch the strings, then your strings won't even move at all. So this is more or less what it's going to look like on the cello. And the difference in sound, you probably won't hear so well, but here's with the mute on. And then I'll take the mute off. And we'll do the same thing without the mute. So I doubt that my microphone here will really, or YouTube will really show you the difference in volume between the rubber mute, practice mute and the non-practice mute sound, but it's definitely a lot less. One of the things that it does is it just kills the vibrations that are going through your bridge. So this will definitely at least have your sound, that sound production that you're making. So if you really need to practice very quietly, you can get a practice mute. I would suggest starting with a rubber mute and seeing if this is a good valid solution for your needs. Even though the metal mutes are more effective, in my experience, if they don't fit properly, and even when they do fit relatively properly, they will kind of vibrate themselves out off the bridge and then fall down. And because they're so heavy and because they're made out of metal, I had the situation where it scratched the top of my cello, which is one of the reasons why I then looked for a rubber alternative. So even though they're a little bit more effective, I would definitely look for a rubber mute instead. And just so you know, this here, there's also these kinds of mutes, which you may have seen. And if you don't know what these mutes are, these are actually playing mutes or performance mutes. They come in kind of a couple of different sizes and shapes. But if it's a small mute like this is not a practice mute. This does not dampen your sound nearly as much as a practice mute. I had a few students who bought some of these because they were nice and cheap. And then they were like, "Oh, but it doesn't work at all." And I was like, "Well, show it to me." And it was one of these. These mutes are used in music, in classical music especially. There's a lot of markings for using a mute. It changes the sound quality a bit, and it makes for a very kind of special string sound. But they're not meant for dampening your sound for your neighbors. That is definitely not what they're for. The thing is with the mutes is I would try to make sure that you're not practicing only with the practice mute. Because the practice mute is going to dampen your sound so much that that you can't work on your sound production, which is an important thing in classical music. But if it's really just about learning the pitches and kind of practicing your fingers, and if you only do it occasionally, using a practice mute can definitely be a good thing. So I see that we have a question: is the cello just the big brother of the violin? In a sense, yes. Absolutely. They all come from the violin family. What makes the violin family is that they are instruments, string instruments, with this basic shape that have 4 strings that are tuned in fifths. So this means that violin, viola, and cello are all part of the violin family. They function basically using the same principles. Strangely enough, the double bass is not part of the violin family. It has a slightly different shape, but most importantly, it has 4 strings, but they're tuned in fourths, which is 1 note less between between the strings, and that's the big reason why the double bass is actually not part of the violin family. It comes from the gamba family, I think. And so that's just a whole different history and tradition. But yes, very good question. It is actually literally the big brother in this case, because they are part of the same family officially. All right. So we was talking also about mutes. The other thing you can do to help your neighbors not hear so much of you is to look at your room where you're practicing. A few times I've had discussions with people who are like, "Oh, my cello's so loud, and my neighbors are having such a big problem," and they were practicing in a big empty room. Big empty rooms end up functioning like a second cello box. They just make all of your sound even louder. So wherever you're practicing, if you really need it to be quiet, um, look that you find a room or add some furniture or cushions or blankets or something, so that there's a whole bunch of cushy stuff everywhere and not so many flat walls. Uh, Margaret Virginia, can you use super attack to glue open parts? Please don't. Please don't. But you know absolutely what you should use. No, that's terrible. Terrible idea. Yeah, do not use any glue, any old glue for opening for repairing cello seams. Go to your instrument maker, and if you have no one who can fix your cello in the next 100 miles from wherever you live, there is a specific kind of glue that you use for this purpose, and I would definitely try to learn how to do that before trying to glue your cello back together. That's not not something you want to do with regular super glue. The reason being that pretty much every other glue doesn't shrink and expand with the instrument, which means that they will probably, while your cello is shrinking and expanding, the only thing that's going to be soft enough to give will be the wood. And so your cello will crack because you used glue that was too strong. That's kind of the basic reason you do not want to use glue that is not made for instruments on instruments. They will usually be much too strong, and then your wood will crack instead of just the seam opening up, which is a fairly easy fix in comparison to if you have to actually fix a crack in your body. Yeah, good question. Thanks for mentioning that. Good. So we're kind of wrapping up. It's just the last couple of minutes. Yeah, there really is a violin family. I figured you were joking, but I enjoyed the fact that this was that it was actually a correct question. That it was in fact true that they're a family. Yeah, this has been really fun. Hopefully, I'll do this again. Maybe I'll talk about some other stuff. The last times was about cello care and kind of basic random stuff about how to keep your cello, what to do with your cello. Um, so if you have any other questions that I didn't get into during the live session here now, then absolutely get in touch. Write a comment here or go to my website and send me a message, and I'll be happy to answer some questions. Yes, just natural and reversible glue for future works. Yes, absolutely. Yeah, I would love to do this again, and maybe we'll talk about some basic position things, some basics for cello beginners who are just getting started. A lot of times you have your first lesson, and then you go home and you know a few things, and then you realize you also don't know so many other things. And so a lot of people will then turn to YouTube for a little help on looking at some of the basics that they learned with their teacher. So I might do a live session on that just to answer some more questions about basic positioning and sort of different theories on how to hold your bow and uh, what do you start with and do you deal with the left hand and that sort of thing. Um, Thank you very much for being here, and I had a few people watching live. That was really great. Um, I hope that the quality was definitely a lot better than last time. This time I was on an actual Ethernet connection. Last time I only had access to Wi-Fi, and I think that was a bit of a problem. And yeah, thanks very much. Then have a good night and or day or morning wherever you are and whenever you're watching this. You can find my website in the description of this video. Please subscribe to my channel if you want to know when I'm going to be doing my next live streams, and certainly I have a whole bunch of material about the Freya method. I've recorded all of the parts of the pieces that are on that Freya book. So if you happen to use that method book, you'll find that probably very helpful. And And I will hopefully take bits of these videos and create kind of short cello care videos out of them, or using some of the ideas that I got from you and your questions. Alrighty, well then, thank you very much, and special shout out again to Marco Pedrini, who was making some comments, but he is the maker of my absolutely amazing cello. So if you watch any of my videos of my original songs, you should see the cello in most of them. I don't actually have that cello visible in all of my videos because a few times I did some dangerous things with it, like going on a canoe. And another time we filmed in Canada and I didn't have it with me. But what you hear is always my amazing Marco Pedrini cello that I absolutely love. And he makes a lot of instruments still, and you can buy those from him. You can find his website just by looking for Marco Pedrini on Google, and maybe I'll add that to the comments as well. All right. Thanks very much. Bye bye then.